Minneapolis, in January 2026, is not a city. It is an ice-locked fortress. The air carries a metallic tang, the taste of frostbite and diesel exhaust that lingers in the lungs. The temperature has plummeted to 20 degrees below zero, a cold so absolute it turns rubber brittle and makes the breath of a man look like a dying ghost. At the intersection of 34th Street and Portland Avenue, the silence is deceptive. This is the heart of the South Side, Powderhorn Park, a neighborhood where the scars of 2020 are still etched into the brick and mortar of every storefront. The residents here do not just live, they observe. They have learned that safety is a fragile illusion, shattered by the flash of a siren or the unannounced arrival of men in tactical gear. But on the morning of January 7th, the air felt different. There was a heaviness, a static charge in the atmosphere that warned of an approaching storm. And then, it happened. A dark red Honda Pilot, a vehicle meant for family trips and grocery runs, now sat mangled against the wood of a pole, its tires spinning uselessly against the ice. Inside, slumped over the steering wheel, was a 37-year-old woman. Her name was Renee Nicole Macklin Good.
Renee.
Outside, standing in the middle of the frozen street, his breath pluming in the air like smoke from a dragon, was Jonathan Ross. He was not a local police officer. He was a veteran of the ICE Special Response Team, a man trained for war on the streets of America. This was not just a tragic accident. This was a collision of two worlds, two histories, and two very different versions of the truth. How did a celebrated poet, a mother,
of the soul,
and a guardian of civil rights end up with 3 federal bullets in her head? And why, as the snow turned red, did the wheels of justice grind to a sudden, screeching halt? Welcome to the Anomaly Archive. To truly grasp the magnitude of what occurred on that frozen morning, we must first strip away the tactical reports and the political spin. We must look at the life that was extinguished in a matter of seconds. Renee Nicole Macklin Good was a woman defined by her capacity for empathy.
Her mother, Donna Gongar.
Her mother, Donna Gongar, would later describe her as one of the kindest people I have ever known. But kindness in the South Side of Minneapolis is often paired with a fierce sense of duty. In 2020, as the world was gripped by a pandemic and social upheaval, Renee graduated from Old Dominion University with a degree in English. She was a master of words, a poet who saw the hidden mechanics of the world. She won the prestigious Academy of American Poets Prize for her work on learning to dissect fetal pigs. If you read that poem today, it feels like a dark premonition. She wrote about the cold, clinical act of opening a life to see how it works, the tension between the physical body and the spirit. Little did she know, 6 years later, her own body would be the subject of a cold, federal report, her life dissected not by a poet, but by investigators looking for a reason to justify her death. Her life was a journey of resilience.
True resilience is
In 2023, tragedy struck when her first husband, Timmy Ray Macklin Jr., died suddenly at the age of 36.
We miss him so much.
Renee was forced to navigate the hollow spaces of grief while raising their young son.
She didn't break.
She didn't
She rebuilt.
break. She rebuilt. She found love again with Rebecca Good, and together they moved to Minneapolis to start Be Good Handwork,
because true quality,
a small business built on the craft of the human hand.
Takes time to get
But
it
on
just
January
right.
7th, 2026, Renee was not at her workbench. She was
All right,
answering a
check the
call
gear
to witness.
and remember the protocol.
She was a legal observer. For those who don't know, these are the volunteers who wear neon green hats and carry cameras to the front lines of police activity. They are the eyes of the community. They don't intervene. They just watch. They record. They ensure that those with power do not abuse it in the dark. Renee sat in her Honda Pilot, her camera ready. She was there to watch a federal raid in her neighborhood. She believed that the law protected her, that her role as a peaceful observer made her invisible to violence. She was wrong. Now, we must look at the man on the other side of the glass. Jonathan Ross was not a monster in the eyes of his peers. By all accounts, he was a dedicated professional, a 43-year-old agent who had spent over a decade in the high-stakes World War of ICE operations. But Ross was a man carrying a heavy burden of his own, a physical and psychological scar that he brought with him to Powderhorn Park. In June of 2025, Ross had nearly lost his life in Bloomington. During an arrest attempt of a high-risk suspect, the vehicle involved became a weapon of terror. As Ross reached into the driver's side window, the suspect floored the accelerator. Ross was dragged for nearly 100 yards. Think about that distance. 100 yards of skin meeting asphalt. 100 yards of bone vibrating against a moving machine.
The stitches.
He required 33 stitches to close the wounds in his arms and hands, 20 stitches in one arm alone, and 13 in his dominant hand. But the stitches in his mind never quite held. This is the core of the federal justification. High-profile figures like Kristi Noem and J.D. Vance would later point to this incident as the defining moment of the Ross defense. They argued that Ross wasn't just an agent. He was a victim of domestic terrorism who had learned the hard way that a car is a ballistic weapon. To the Department of Homeland Security, Ross's fear was objectively reasonable. They claim he saw the red Honda Pilot not as a neighbor's car, but as a repeat of the Bloomington nightmare. The ICE Special Response Team is trained to operate in a state of hyper-vigilance. They are taught that in a high-threat environment, you do not wait for the threat to manifest. You neutralize it before it can take another limb. When Ross stood in the snow, his brain was likely replaying that June afternoon. The rev of an engine wasn't a sound. It was a death knell. But here is where the logic of the state and the logic of the street diverge. Federal supporters see a traumatized hero protecting his team. The residents of Minneapolis see a man who was too broken to be carrying a badge. A man who saw a lethal enemy where there was only a woman trying to back out of a parking space. Let us look at the footage. 47 seconds of digital memory that have become the most scrutinized piece of evidence in Minnesota history. The video was captured by a bystander, and it captures an atmosphere of extreme, apparent aggression from the federal team. At the start of the clip, we hear the voice of Renee Good. She is remarkably calm for someone surrounded by tactical gear. "That's fine, dude," she says. "I'm not mad at you."
We just need to remain calm.
This is the
until
voice
they
of the
arrive.
poet, the peacemaker. She isn't shouting. She isn't gesturing wildly. She is attempting to de-escalate a situation that was already boiling over. But the response from the street is anything but peaceful. Multiple bystander recordings, later highlighted by investigative reports, record an agent shouting for her to get out of the fucking car. And then, a voice, allegedly Ross or an agent in his immediate circle, snarls back, "Fucking bitch!" This language is a window into the state of mind of the agents. It sets a stage where Renee is already viewed as an antagonist, not a citizen. In the eyes of the law, The objective reasonableness of a shooting depends on the perceived threat. But if an officer has already dehumanized the subject, the threshold for pulling the trigger drops into a dangerous zone. At the 15-second mark, Renee shifts the Honda Pilot into reverse. The white reverse lights flicker against the snow. She is moving away from the agents, creating space to maneuver. She then cuts the wheel to the left, intending to pull around the federal SUV and leave the area. As the car begins to move forward, it is traveling slowly, no more than 5 or 10 miles per hour. It is not a ramming maneuver. It is the movement of a driver trying to navigate a tight, ice-covered street. But for Jonathan Ross, that forward motion toward his general direction was the only signal he needed. Ross did not move to the side. He did not seek cover behind another vehicle. He stood his ground and fired 3 rounds of 9mm ammunition directly through the driver's side glass. These were not warning shots. These were targeted, lethal rounds aimed at the head of the driver. In 3 sharp cracks, the life of Renee Nicole Macklin Good was taken. The Honda Pilot, now pilotless, rolled forward until it slammed into the utility pole. Ross, according to the video, simply turned and walked away. He didn't rush to render aid. He didn't check for a pulse. He walked with the steady gait of a man who had successfully neutralized a target, while a few feet away, a wife in a community began to scream. As the red Honda Pilot sat motionless against the utility pole, the silence that followed the 3 gunshots was not a quiet peace. It was a vacuum, a heavy, suffocating void that was quickly filled by the sounds of a neighborhood in trauma. Rebecca Good's screams cut through the -20-degree air like a jagged blade. Witnesses who had been watching from their porches, behind the safety of double-paned glass, now spilled out into the street. Within an hour, the intersection of 34th and Portland was no longer a crime scene. It was a battlefield of ideologies. The local police from the Minneapolis Police Department arrived, but they were greeted with a cold, professional wall of federal agents. The ICE Special Response Team did not hand over the scene. They did not offer explanations. They formed a perimeter, their tactical gear a stark, dark contrast against the pristine white snow. By nightfall, the first candles were lit. Hundreds of people, wrapped in heavy parkas and wool scarves, gathered under the same light pole that Renee's car had struck. They brought flowers that froze within minutes. They brought signs that read, "Justice for Renee," and "Who watches the observers?" The grief was mixed with a familiar, poisonous rage. In Minneapolis, the memory of George Floyd is not a distant history. It is a constant, throbbing nerve. To this community, Renee Nicole Macklin Good was not just a victim. She was a martyr for the very cause of transparency. While the neighborhood mourned, a different kind of fire was being stoked in the halls of power. Mayor Jacob Frey and Governor Tim Walz issued a joint statement before the sun had even set. Their words were sharp, focused, and heavy with frustration. They demanded an immediate, transparent investigation by the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, known as the BCA. They demanded that the federal government acknowledge that a civilian had been killed on city soil by a man who did not answer to local law. But the response from Washington, D.C. arrived like a cold front from the north. Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem did not mince words. In a televised address, she described the incident not as a tragic shooting, but as a necessary act of defense against domestic interference. The Department of Homeland Security released a preliminary statement claiming that Renee had weaponized her vehicle, using it to impede a high-risk federal operation. This is the point where the narrative fractures beyond repair. The federal government began to build a profile of Renee that her friends and family did not recognize. They highlighted her presence at past protests. They pointed to her role as a legal observer, as evidence of calculated obstruction.
A federal spokesperson has issued a statement.
Vice President J.D. Vance weighed in, stating that the American public must stand with agents who are forced to make split-second decisions in war zones like Minneapolis. But back in Minnesota, Attorney General Keith Ellison was looking at the law. He knew the hurdle that lay ahead. It is a legal doctrine that dates back to the year 1890, a Supreme Court case known as In Re Nihil. Under this precedent, federal agents are granted a nearly impenetrable shield called Supremacy Clause immunity. It states that if a federal officer is acting in the course of their duties, and if they have an objectively reasonable belief that their actions are necessary, they cannot be prosecuted by a state or local government.
The collapse of local government
This is the dead zone of American law. It means that even if a local jury wanted to convict Jonathan Ross of murder, the federal government could simply step in and dismiss the charges before the trial even began. The tension reached a breaking point 48 hours after the shooting. The BCA, Minnesota's top investigators, arrived at the FBI field office to request access to the ballistic evidence and the red Honda Pilot. They were turned away at the door. The FBI informed them that the investigation was now strictly federal. The state of Minnesota, the city of Minneapolis, and the family of Renee Good were officially locked out of the truth. To understand why the federal government is fighting so hard to protect Jonathan Ross, we must look at the culture of the Special Response Team. The SRT is the elite tier of ICE. They are the men and women sent into the most volatile situations, human trafficking rings, cartel hideouts, and high-risk warrants. Their training is modeled after military special forces. They operate in a world where threat assessment is the only thing that matters. Jonathan Ross was a product of this culture. He had served over 10 years in this high-pressure environment.
I look at this every day.
But as we discussed earlier, the trauma of his June 2025 injury had changed him. The 33 stitches in his arms were a constant reminder of how quickly a car can turn into a coffin. Federal supporters argue that we cannot judge Ross by the standards of a civilian. They argue that his hyper-vigilance was not a flaw, but a survival mechanism.
Ross's brain didn't see.
They claim that when Renee shifted her car into reverse, Ross's brain didn't see a woman backing up to be helpful. It saw a pre-attack indicator. When she turned the wheel toward the gap in the street, he didn't see an exit maneuver. He saw a ramming vector. Simimri. This is the tragic irony of the elite officer. When you are trained to see every movement as a potential killing blow, the world becomes a place where poets are indistinguishable from terrorists. But the neighborhood of Powderhorn Park remembers a different Ross. They remember an agent who had been seen earlier that day acting with what they described as unnecessary hostility. Witnesses claim that the "fucking bitch" comment captured on audio wasn't a slip of the tongue, but part of a pattern of behavior that showed a total lack of respect for the citizens they were supposed to be serving. This raises the most uncomfortable question of all. Did Jonathan Ross shoot Renee because he was afraid? Or did he shoot her because he was angry? The federal reports will never mention the poetry of Renee Nicole Macklin Good. They will never mention that she was a woman who spent her nights writing about the tender mechanics of the soul. They will focus on the weight of the Honda Pilot, the angle of the tires, and the proximity of the agent. But in the weeks following the shooting, her poem on learning to dissect fetal pigs went viral once again. People found a chilling, almost prophetic meaning in its lines. Renee wrote about the clinical coldness of those who handle life as if it were merely a specimen. She wrote about the small hearts that stop without a sound.
The light endures.
Now, those words are being read at her vigils, a final, haunting message from a witness who was silenced by the very machine she was trying to document. The impact of her death has reached far beyond Minneapolis. It has sparked a national debate about the Legal Observer programs. Across the country, these programs are being scrutinized. Law enforcement agencies are calling for them to be restricted, labeling them as impediments to justice. Meanwhile, civil rights groups are calling them more necessary than ever. If an observer can be shot in broad daylight, in a car, while being calm, then what does that mean for the average citizen who pulls out a phone to record a traffic stop? To understand why a man can fire 3 bullets into a car in broad daylight and never see the inside of a courtroom, we must descend into the labyrinth of American federal law. The state of Minnesota, despite its sovereignty, found itself hitting a wall made of centuries-old precedent. This is the reality of the Supremacy Clause. A pillar of the Constitution that dictates federal law is the supreme law of the land. Attorney General Keith L. Isoon, a man who successfully prosecuted the killers of George Floyd, found his hands tied by a case from the year 1890, known as In Re Negul. In that case, the Supreme Court ruled that a federal agent cannot be tried for a state crime if they were performing their duties in a way they believed was necessary and proper. Think about the power in those 2 words, necessary and proper. Who gets to decide what is necessary? In the case of Renee Nicole Macklin Good, it was not a jury of her peers in Minneapolis.
Renee Nicole Macklin
It was the
Good.
Department of Justice, the very same wing of the government that employed Jonathan Ross. By seizing the evidence, the red Honda pilot, and the ballistic reports, the FBI created a vacuum of information. They effectively placed Ross into a safe harbor, far beyond the reach of local prosecutors who were under immense pressure to seek justice. This legal stalemate created a second trauma for the city. It wasn't just that a woman was dead. It was the realization that the federal government could operate like an occupying force, exempt from the rules of the territory it occupied. This is the dead zone of the law, where the geography of a crime is local, but the consequences are erased by a federal shield. On January 8th, 2026, the frustration spilled over. Hundreds of protesters marched toward the Bishop Henry Whipple Federal Building at Fort Snelling. This building is a fortress of glass and concrete, isolated near the airport, surrounded by high fences and armed guards. It is the administrative heart of ICE in the Midwest, and on that day, it was the symbol of an unreachable power. The air was so cold that the protesters' breaths formed a thick, white mist that hung over the crowd like a shroud. They carried signs with Renee's poetry. They shouted her name until their throats were raw from the frozen air. But the response from within the Whipple building was clinical. Federal Protective Services deployed canisters of chemical irritants, the white smoke of the gas mixing with the gray mist of the winter day. Inside those walls, the narrative of Renee Nicole Macklin Good was being systematically rewritten. To the people outside, she was a mother and a writer.
Everything starts here.
To the officials inside, she was Subject 1, an agitator who had used a 3-ton vehicle to threaten the safety of a federal team. The Secretary of Homeland Security,
Security
Kristi
confirms the
Noem
asset is in position,
repeatedly
awaiting your
emphasized that the agents were conducting a high-priority operation, and that any civilian in the area who did not follow verbal commands was part of the threat. This is the logic of the tactical mind. In a high-priority zone, there are no bystanders, only participants. By refusing to leave her vehicle, by recording the agents, and finally by attempting to drive away, Renee was classified not as an observer, but as a domestic combatant. In a small apartment not far from Powderhorn Park, Rebecca Good sat in a silence that was far louder than the protests. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the sound of the 3 pops.
Don't forget the dog.
Every time she looked at their pet dog, she remembered the moment she fell into the snow and screamed that it was her fault. Rebecca's grief was not just for the loss of her wife, but for the loss of the world they were trying to build. They had come to Minneapolis for a fresh start, a place where they could be creative and safe. Now, she was a widow in a city that felt like a crime scene. She spoke of Renee's love for their son, of the way she could find the perfect word for a feeling that didn't have a name yet. They took her words, Rebecca told a local
We
reporter.
are looking into the details.
They
of
took
the
her
crash
life,
site.
and then they tried to take her reputation.
My
My wife was not a terrorist.
labeled a domestic
She was a person who
terrorist.
believed that the truth was worth recording.
We will proceed with the federal.
But in the federal narrative,
According to
Rebecca's
the files,
voice
the
was an
incident occurred
inconvenience.
precisely at
The Department of Justice released snippets of audio from the scene, focusing on the chaos and the shouting. They ignored the calm, steady voice of Renee saying, "I am not mad at you." In the cold, calculated world of legal defense, kindness is not a piece of evidence. Fear is.
Return to Jonathan
And so we
Ross.
return to Jonathan Ross, the man behind the Sig Sauer P320. We must ask ourselves, what does it say about a system that permits a man with documented, severe trauma to lead a tactical team into a residential neighborhood? The 33 stitches in Ross's arm were not just physical wounds. They were psychological markers. In the world of high-stakes law enforcement, there is often a culture of silence around PTSD. Agents are
Unbreakable.
expected to be
The
unbreakable,
system knew it.
but Ross was broken, and the system knew it. They knew he had been dragged 100 yards. They knew he had nearly died. By placing him back in the field, back behind a gun, and back in front of a moving vehicle, the federal government
You
set a
have to
trap
ask
for both
if he was
him
just
and
a
the public.
victim of a machine.
Is Jonathan Ross a villain? Or is he another
them,
victim of a
we're
machine
just
that
parts
treats
of
its
a machine.
agents like disposable tools? His fear was real, but it was a fear born of a past ghost, not the woman in the red Honda Pilot. The anomaly here is not just the shooting. It is the fact that the law allows this transferred trauma to be a valid excuse for taking a life. If we accept that an officer's past trauma justifies their present violence, then we have accepted a
Use of
world
force is
where
not
there is
about
no
violence.
objective
It's
reality.
about controlling subjective
There is
fear.
only the subjective fear of the man with the gun.
He's got a gun.
In that world, every car is a weapon, and every neighbor is a threat.
Renee,
The case of Renee Nicole Macklin Good remains a deep, unhealing wound in the heart of Minneapolis. As of today, January 2026, there have been no charges,
As of January
no apologies,
2026, there have been
no changes to the federal laws that protect agents from state
Pursuant to the
prosecution.
revised statutes of 1890, the state
Jonathan
brings
Ross
this
remains a
action.
free man, shielded by the very government he serves.
Whatever
The red
purpose
Honda
this
Pilot
weapon
is still
serves,
locked in a federal
it is
evidence locker,
secured now.
its bullet-shattered glass a silent testament to
Though the
47
city
seconds of
stands
terror.
like a fortress, questions remain.
Renee's legacy, however, lives on in the green hats of the legal observers who still walk the streets of Minneapolis.
Her
It lives
legacy
on in her
remains,
poetry,
and
which
they
continues
still
to be
walk the
read as a
streets.
defiance against the clinical coldness of the state. She taught us that the act of watching is an act of courage. She taught us that the truth, even when it is captured on a shaky cell phone camera, is the only thing that can challenge a fortress. But the questions remain. Do you believe that the federal government should have the power to override local justice? Do you think that an agent's past trauma should be a legal defense for a shooting? And most importantly, if a poet isn't safe while sitting calmly in her car, telling an officer she isn't mad at him, then who among us is? Tell us what you think in the comments below. This is a case that demands your voice. Our next investigation will take us to the remote woods of the Pacific Northwest, where a series of disappearances has left local authorities baffled, and a mysterious figure has been caught on trail cameras. Which file should we open next? Tell us in the comments below. Thank you for spending this time with us in the shadows.
Containment protocol now.
Stay observant.